The rain drummed on the black awning that had been placed over the grave. The drops bounced off the taut fabric and fell on my shoulders, but I hardly noticed their touch. My hand, which had been holding the umbrella, had slipped down, and now the cold streams of water flowed freely down my face, mingling with my tears. Howard Aldridge, loving husband and father, 1944 to 2024. The inscription on the plaque that had been placed temporarily until a permanent headstone could be made was so simple and impersonal. Could those few words encapsulate 59 years of our marriage? 59 years of conversations, arguments, reconciliations, joys, and sorrows? I felt the presence of people around me, but they seemed like blurred silhouettes, as if I were watching them through fogged glass. Someone's hands were supporting me. Someone's voice was whispering something in my ear, perhaps words of comfort. But none of it mattered. "Mom, the ceremony is over. It's time to go." Calder's voice brought me back to reality. My son stood beside me, tall and statuesque, so much like his father when he was young. Now he was in his 50s, and his face was already showing signs of age, the wrinkles in the corners of his eyes, the creases around his mouth. But his gaze remained as cold and appraising as it had always been. "Just a minute," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the grave. "Violet," a woman's voice said, "you're going to get soaked. Besides, the guests are on their way to our house." Paisley, Calder's wife, came from the other side. Her long red hair was neatly bunched and her black dress seemed too fancy for a funeral. She carefully slipped the coat I'd left in the car over my shoulders, but there was no genuine sympathy in her eyes, just impatience. "All right," I finally agreed. "Let's go." Calder helped me into their car. It took only 15 minutes to get to the house where Howard and I had lived for the past 30 years, but it felt like an eternity. Worcester, our little town, looked especially gloomy today. Howard and I had moved here when Calder went to elementary school. Before that, we'd lived in Boston, where Howard worked as an electrical engineer, and I worked as an accountant for a small company. We both dreamed of a quiet life away from the hustle and bustle of the big city, and when the opportunity arose, we moved to Worcester without hesitation. Our house, a Victorian mansion with a small garden, bought for nothing and restored by Howard's hands, seemed empty and alien now. People had already gathered in the living room: neighbors, Howard's colleagues, a few distant relatives and acquaintances. They were all expressing their condolences, hugging me, saying something, but I felt like an actress in a play whose meaning eluded me. "Sit down, Mother," Calder pointed to a chair by the fireplace. "I'll bring you some tea." I sank obediently into the chair, the same one in which Howard had spent his evenings reading the newspapers. It still held the shape of his body, and for a moment I thought I felt the warmth of his presence. "Mrs. Aldridge, I'm so sorry for your loss," said Mr. Brooks, our neighbor and Howard's longtime friend. "We'll all miss him very much." "Thank you, Noah," I said quietly. "Howard always appreciated your friendship. If you need anything, just let me know. Elizabeth and I are always here for you." "I know. Thank you," chuckles. The conversations continued as I stared at the portrait of Howard that Paisley had placed on the mantelpiece. The picture had been taken just 2 years ago, on our wedding anniversary. Howard was smiling his trademark half smile, the left corner of his lips slightly raised. His eyes, clear and penetrating, looked straight into the lens. No one could have guessed then that the cancer had already begun its ravages inside his body. "Here, drink this." Calder handed me a cup of tea. "Are you okay?" "How can I be?" I took the cup with trembling hands. "Your father is dead." Calder pressed his lips together and nodded, as if my answer was exactly what he expected. He'd always been reserved, even as a child. No violent emotions, no rash behavior. Sometimes I'd thought he'd gotten that trait from me, but over the years I'd come to think his coldness was of a different nature. "You need to rest," he continued. "Paisley will stay with the guests, and I'll take you upstairs." "No." I shook my head. "I have to be here. It's my duty to Howard." "Suit yourself." He shrugged and stepped back. I watched him join Paisley, who was talking to a group of people at the hors d'oeuvres table. They'd been married for 15 years, but they'd never had children. "It's not time yet?" Paisley said every time Howard delicately inquired when they would give him grandchildren. Eventually he stopped asking. Paisley worked in real estate and, admittedly, was quite successful. Calder took a job with a technology company after college and eventually rose to the position of department manager. They lived an hour away from us in Boston and visited us no more than once a month, usually at Howard's insistence. Calder had never been attached to his parents' home. As a teenager, he dreamed of moving away, getting out of this hole, as he put it. I remember how Howard worried about this, tried to find a common language with his son, but without success. Something in their relationship had gone wrong from the beginning. Some invisible wall had grown between them. "Violet, dear," Elizabeth Brooks sat down beside me, interrupting my musings. "Have you eaten anything today?" "I don't remember," I admitted honestly. "I'll get you some sandwiches. You need to keep your strength up." Elizabeth was my closest friend in Worcester. We'd met when we first moved here, and we'd maintained a warm relationship ever since. She was 5 years younger than I was, but sometimes it seemed like the difference between us was much greater, so vigorous and cheerful was she even at 73. Gradually, people began to disperse. Some came to say goodbye, others just quietly left. By evening, it was just me, Calder, Paisley, and the Brookses. "We should probably go too," Noah said, helping Elizabeth put on her coat. "But we'll stop by tomorrow." "You shouldn't be alone." "It's all right," I assured them. "Calder and Paisley will stay the night." After the Brookses left, the house was quiet. Paisley began to put the dishes away, and Calder settled into the chair across from me. "Mom, we need to talk about some things," he began. "Not today." I held up my hand, stopping him. "Please, not today." "Okay," he nodded. "But we still have to talk about it soon. About the house, about finances. Your father has it all worked out." I remembered our last conversation with Howard. He said something about a will. "Will?" Calder stepped forward. "He'd made a new will?" "I think so." I rubbed my temples, trying to focus. "He'd been talking a lot in the last few weeks about getting it right. But I'd been so focused on his treatment, on making him comfortable." "Do you know where that will is?" There was a note in Calder's voice that I couldn't recognize. "No," I shook my head. "Maybe in his office, or in a safe at the bank." "We'll see." Calder leaned back in his chair. "Don't worry about it now." Paisley came back from the kitchen and sat down next to her husband. "What are you two talking about?" she inquired. "Mom says that Dad might have made a new will before he died," Calder replied. "Did he?" Paisley looked at me with sudden interest. "What's in it?" "I don't know," I admitted. Howard had mentioned it, but we hadn't discussed the details. I was sure we'd have time. The last weeks of Howard's life were a blur of pain and despair. The doctors gave him no more than a month, but he lasted almost 3. He remained conscious until his last day. Those strong painkillers often made him drowsy and disoriented. In one such moment of lucidity, just 2 days before his death, he took my hand and said, "Violet, remember the will. Everything is going to be okay." At the time, I just nodded, thinking he was talking about an old document we drafted about 10 years ago. But now, remembering the look on his face, I began to doubt it. "Maybe his lawyer knows?" Paisley suggested. "What's his name? Randall?" "Hampton," I corrected. "Arthur Hampton. But I don't think we should bother him now. I'll call him tomorrow." "I can do that for you," Calder offered quickly. "You should get some rest." "Thank you, but I can manage on my own." I rose from the chair. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd really like to rest." "Of course, Mom," Calder nodded. "Paisley and I will stay in the guest room as usual." I walked up the stairs to the second floor, feeling the fatigue come in waves. Howard and I's bedroom was at the end of the hallway. I stopped in front of the door, hesitant to enter. For the first time in almost 60 years, I would be sleeping there alone. I gathered my courage and opened the door. The room looked as if Howard had just left and was about to return. His robe was still hanging on the hook by the bathroom door. His glasses were on the bedside table, and his unread book was halfway open. I walked over to the bed and sat on his side. The pillow still held the dent from his head. I ran my hand over the sheet, trying to feel the warmth that had long since disappeared. Tears came to my eyes again, and this time I didn't hold them back. I don't know how long I spent like that, sitting on the edge of the bed and crying. At some point I heard voices from downstairs. Calder and Paisley arguing about something. Their words were unintelligible, but their tone was unmistakable. They weren't happy. I sighed. My relationship with my son had always been complicated, but since he'd married Paisley, it had gotten even more complicated. Howard had been a buffer between us, smoothing over sharp edges and keeping conflicts at bay. Now that buffer was gone, I changed into my nightgown and lay on my side of the bed. Staring up at the ceiling, I thought back to our life with Howard. How we'd met at the university ball in 1964. How he'd proposed to me a year later, standing in the pouring rain outside my dormitory. Our small wedding in the presence of only our closest friends and family. Calder's birth in 1970, the joy and sleepless nights it brought. Calder was a difficult child, demanding, stubborn, always knowing what he wanted. As a teenager, these qualities only intensified. Howard and I often argued about how to raise him. Howard thought we should be stricter, set clear boundaries. I, on the other hand, was afraid of losing touch with my son and often made concessions. As a result, Calder learned to manipulate both of us, playing on our differences. By his early 20s, he had completely distanced himself from us. He went to college as far away from home as possible and only showed up on holidays, and even then reluctantly. When he introduced Paisley to us, Howard and I had been glad, hoping that marriage would make him gentler, bring him back into the family. But Paisley, beautiful and ambitious, turned out to be as cold and calculating as our son. Howard never said it out loud, but I knew he was disappointed. Not in Calder per se. He'd always been proud of his success in his career, but in what their relationship had become. In recent years, they'd chatted mostly about work and politics, avoiding any personal topics. "Violet, remember the will. Everything will be okay." Those words came back to my mind. What did Howard mean by that? Where was the will? And what was in it that should give me peace of mind? With these thoughts, I drifted into a restless sleep, in which Howard was again near me, but I could not hear what he was saying to me, no matter how hard I tried. Morning brought with it a new wave of realization of loss. For a moment, just waking up, I forgot Howard was gone and turned to wish him good morning. The emptiness on his side of the bed was like a blow under my breath. I forced myself to get up and get dressed. Voices from downstairs suggested that Calder and Paisley were already awake. As I walked down the stairs, I heard them talking. "We need to move faster," Paisley said. "Who knows what's in this new will?" "Quiet," Calder cut her off. "She might hear." I froze on the last steps, but then I continued down the stairs with determination. Whatever was in that will, I had to find it. Howard had taken care of me, I was sure of it. And I wouldn't let anyone, not even my own son, interfere with his last will. May was surprisingly warm in Worcester. The garden behind the house was in full bloom, full of fragrance and color, but I didn't care. It had been a month since I'd buried Howard, and the pain wasn't less, just different. Now it wasn't the sharp agony of fresh loss, but the dull, aching emptiness that accompanied my every day. I sat on the veranda, wrapped in plaid, even though the day was warm. My mother had knitted it, and it held the smell of our house, the smell of Howard. In the mornings, I would come out here with a cup of tea and look out at the garden my husband and I had cultivated together for so many years. The irises, his favorite flowers, were now in full bloom, their purple and yellow heads nodding at me as if in sympathy. "Violet, are you here?" Paisley's voice shattered the silence of the morning. I sighed. He and Calder had started showing up at the house a lot more often than they used to. Sometimes on weekends, sometimes during the week, always unannounced. "On the porch," I said, not hiding the tiredness in my voice. Paisley came out to me, flawless as ever-perfect hair, designer clothes, not a single crease. Next to her, I felt old and unkept in my simple homemade dress and my gray hair carelessly bunched up. "We brought groceries," she announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And Calder wants to see what's up with the garage roof. Did you say it was leaking?" "I didn't say that," I replied quietly. "The roof is perfectly fine. Howard fixed it last fall." "Yeah?" Paisley looked surprised. "Well, anyway, he wants to check it out. It's better to be sure the house is okay." I nodded silently. There was no point in arguing. Calder had taken an unusual interest in the condition of the house lately, checking the plumbing, the electrical wiring, the foundation. Looking out for your safety, Mom, he said. But I could see him looking around carefully, as if evaluating. I'll make dinner, Paisley continued. You look thin. You have to watch your diet at your age. Her voice sounded concerned, but her eyes remained cold. Paisley had never loved me, and I knew it. To her, I was just an unavoidable addition to Calder, an old woman to put up with. It hadn't bothered me before. Howard and I had our own lives, full and happy regardless of my sister-in-law's attitude. Now, her presence in my house made me uncomfortable. Thank you, but I'm not hungry, I said. Maybe later. Suit yourself, Paisley shrugged. But I'll cook anyway. Calder will be hungry after working in the garage. She left, and I sank back into my thoughts. It wasn't just Calder and Paisley's behavior that bothered me, but the fact that I still couldn't remember where Howard had kept the new will. Arthur Hampton, his lawyer, confirmed that such a document did exist. Howard had visited him 2 weeks before his death. But Arthur had no copy, only a record of the meeting. Howard said he wanted to make some changes, so I prepared a draft, Arthur explained to me over the phone. He took it with him to study it. He must have kept the final version with him. I searched Howard's office up and down, checking all the desk drawers, all the files in the closet, even the books on the shelves. Nothing. The safety deposit box we'd rented held only old documents and a few family heirlooms. The will wasn't there. This bothered me more and more every day, especially given Calder and Paisley's strange behavior. It was like they were waiting for something, circling me like vultures looking for prey. Mom? Calder came out on the porch, wiping his hands with a rag. Dark sweat stains appeared on his light blue shirt. What are you doing in the garage? I asked. Just looking around. He sat down next to me. The house is getting old, so I need to keep an eye on it. The house is fine. I looked him straight in the eye. Your father always looked after it. Yes, but my father's gone, Calder said without much emotion, just stating a fact. Now we have to take care of everything. We? Well, yeah, you and me. We're family after all. I looked at my son, trying to see him as the boy I once loved so much. The one who asked me to read to him at bedtime, who cried when he broke his knees, who held me before bed. But in front of me sat a stranger, cold and calculating. How's the search for the will going? As if by the way, he asked. Nothing, I answered honestly. Hampton said Howard took the document with him. It must be here somewhere in the house. I'm surprised he didn't tell you where he kept it, Calder frowned. You always talked about everything. There was a faint note of sarcasm in his voice. He knew it wasn't true. Howard had become more withdrawn in recent years, especially when it came to financial matters. It wasn't that he was hiding anything from me. He just thought I didn't need to worry about it. We can help you with your search, Calder suggested. 4 eyes are better than 2. Thanks, but I can handle it. I smiled, trying to make the smile look genuine. Howard loved his little secrets. I know where to look. It was a lie. I had no idea where to look, but my gut told me that letting Calder and Paisley get involved in the search was a bad idea. Something about their behavior made me wary. Whatever you say, Calder stood up. But don't drag this out too long. We need to decide what to do with the house and the rest of the property. The house? I looked at him in surprise. What should be done with it? Well, it's too big for one person, Calder said. And it's expensive to maintain. Maybe you should think about moving to something smaller, or a nursing home with good care. A nursing home? I felt a wave of resentment rising inside me. I'm 78, not 98, and there's nothing wrong with my head. Of course, Mom. Calder held up his hands conciliatorily. I'm just suggesting options. Paisley and I are worried about you, that's all. With those words, he walked away, leaving me even more worried than before. They want me to sell the house? Move into a nursing home? What's going on? I finished my cooled tea and stood up resolutely. I need to find that will, and as soon as possible. I spent the rest of the day pretending to do my usual chores, but actually keeping a close eye on Calder and Paisley. They stayed for lunch, then Calder fiddled around in the garage for a while longer, and Paisley sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a magazine, but I noticed her eyes sliding around the room, assessing every single thing. Thankfully, they left by evening, promising to return in 2 days. As soon as their car disappeared around the corner, I felt the tension release me a little. Now I could continue my search without their intrusive presence. I decided to start in a place I hadn't checked yet, the attic. Howard liked to go up there sometimes, said it was a good place to think. We kept old things there, photo albums, Calder's childhood toys that we'd been hesitant to throw away, and many other memorabilia that had accumulated over the decades we'd been together. The stairs to the attic were steep, and my knees protested with every step, but I climbed stubbornly. The attic was stuffy and dusty. The sunlight streaming in through the small window picked out the silhouettes of furniture, boxes, and chests. I started with the desk Howard had set by the window. In its drawers, I found old letters, receipts, even a few of Calder's school books, but no will. Then I checked the stacks of books along the wall, peering between the pages for a hidden document. Nothing. Time passed, and I grew more and more desperate. Maybe Howard hadn't made a new will after all. Maybe he was just talking about the old one we'd made years ago. Tired and frustrated, I sat down on the old trunk, trying to collect my thoughts. And then it hit me. Our summer cottage by the lake. We'd bought it 15 years ago, a small cottage an hour outside of Worcester. Howard loved to spend weekends there, especially in his later years. What if he kept the will there? The thought gave me back hope. Tomorrow I'll go there and check it out. It's decided. Once down from the attic, I made myself a light dinner and turned on the TV, more for background than out of interest in the program. My thoughts were preoccupied with the upcoming trip. I hadn't been to the cabin since last summer before Howard was diagnosed. What does it look like now? Had thieves broken in? Is the plumbing working? Immersed in these thoughts, I didn't immediately hear the phone ring. Finally, after paying attention to it, I got up and went to the phone. Hello? Violet? It's Elizabeth. How are you, darling? My friend's voice brought with it a wave of relief. With Elizabeth, I could be myself, not pretend everything was okay. Honestly? Not really, I answered. Calder and Paisley came by today. Oh, Elizabeth understood immediately. And how was the visit? Calder suggested that I sell the house and move into a nursing home. What? The indignation in Elizabeth's voice was so sincere that I smiled involuntarily. How dare he? You're doing fine on your own. He says he's worried about me. Nonsense, Elizabeth cut him off. If he really cared, he would have suggested that you move in with them, not into a nursing home. I sighed. Elizabeth was right, but the thought of living under the same roof as Calder and Paisley was even more depressing than the prospect of a nursing home. I'm still looking for Howard's will, I said, changing the subject. I'm going to go to our summer house tomorrow. Maybe it's there. Would you like me to come with you? Elizabeth offered. Noah is going fishing with his friends anyway. That would be great, I said, genuinely excited. I'll pick you up at 10? I'll be waiting. After talking to Elizabeth, I felt better. At least for one day, I'd be free of Calder and Paisley's intrusive presence, spend time with my friend, and maybe find what I was looking for. The next morning was clear and warm. I woke up early feeling an unusual burst of energy. After a quick breakfast, I got behind the wheel of my old Ford. Howard had always insisted that I maintain my driving skills, even when I could still drive myself. You never know when it will come in handy, he used to say. And he was right. Elizabeth was already waiting for me on the porch of her house, with a small bag in her hands. I made us lunch, she said, settling into the passenger seat, and a bottle of wine. We deserve a little treat. You're the best, I smiled, pulling out of the car. The drive to the lake took a little over an hour. We drove along a scenic highway surrounded by forests and fields. Elizabeth told me the latest news from town, funny stories about her grandchildren, and for a while I was able to forget my worries. Our cabin stood on a small hill overlooking Lake Quinsigamond. It was modest 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a porch. But Howard and I loved it with all our hearts. It was where we spent our most peaceful and happy days, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. When we pulled up, I was relieved to see that the exterior of the cabin looked pristine. No signs of forced entry or vandalism. I parked the car on the gravel lot in front of the house and turned off the engine. How long has it been since you've been here? Elizabeth asked, getting out of the car and stretching happily. Not since last summer, I said, pulling out my keys. before Howard got sick. It's a beautiful place. Elizabeth looked around. I can see why you loved it. I opened the door and we were greeted by the musty smell of an uninhabited room. There was a thin layer of dust inside, but otherwise it looked just as we'd left it. The pictures on the walls, the books on the shelves, the old plaid on the couch, all of it brought back a new wave of memories and longing for Howard. Where do we start? Elizabeth asked, clearly trying to distract me from my sad thoughts. First, we open the windows, I decided. We need some air. Then I'll check Howard's office. If the will is in here somewhere, it's probably in there. We quickly opened all the windows, letting in the fresh spring air. Then I headed into the small room that Howard used as an office. There was an old desk, bookshelves, and a safe hidden behind a painting of a lake. I got goosebumps, Elizabeth admitted as she watched me remove the painting from the wall, like a detective novel. Hopefully with a happier ending, I muttered as I entered the combination to the safe. The safe opened with a quiet click. Inside were the deeds to the house, some cash we always kept here just in case, and a few pieces of jewelry, including my grandmother's pearl earrings. But there was no will. Check the desk drawers, Elizabeth suggested. I'll check the bookshelves. For the next hour, we methodically searched the study, then the bedrooms, the living room, even the kitchen. We looked in every drawer, checked every book, every folder. Nothing. Maybe it's in your house in Worcester after all, Elizabeth suggested as we sat down on the living room couch, tired. Somewhere you haven't looked yet? I've looked everywhere, I shook my head. In the study, in the bedroom, even in the attic. It's just not there. What if, Elizabeth hesitated, what if Howard didn't have time to sign a new will? Maybe he'd only discussed it with his lawyer but hadn't finalized it? The thought had crossed my mind before, but I didn't want to allow it. If there was no new will, then the old one was in effect, dividing the estate equally between Calder and me. Then his insistence on selling the house would have a sinister meaning. I don't know, I answered honestly. Hampton said Howard had taken the draft with him, but whether it was signed and certified, Arthur doesn't know that. Look, Elizabeth took my hand. Even if there is no new will, you still have rights. Calder can't force you to sell the house or move somewhere else against your will. I know, I smiled weakly. But you have no idea how persistent he can be. He's always gotten his way ever since he was a kid. We were silent, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. Birds were singing outside the window. A light breeze moved the curtains. In this peaceful atmosphere, it was hard to believe that my own son could be plotting something against me. Let's have lunch on the veranda, Elizabeth finally suggested. The weather is beautiful, and I brought a lovely salad and sandwiches. That's a good idea, I agreed. We settled down on the veranda overlooking the lake. The lunch Elizabeth had prepared was excellent, and the wine helped us relax a little. We talked about the past, remembered funny stories, laughed. For a while, I almost forgot about my problems. You know, Elizabeth said as she poured us each a second glass of wine, maybe it's for the best that you didn't find the will today. Why? I wondered. Because now you have time to prepare. She looked at me seriously. Calder and Paisley are obviously up to something. You need to be one step ahead of them. I thought about it. Elizabeth was right. Even if I don't find the will, I have to protect myself from their machinations. What do you suggest? I asked. First, talk to Hampton again. Find out what happens if a new will isn't found. Second, document all of Calder and Paisley's erratic behavior. And third, she paused, you might want to think about reassigning some assets to yourself while you have time. Do you think they can go that far? I still didn't want to believe that my son was capable of real evil. I don't know, Elizabeth answered honestly. But it's better to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best. We returned to Worcester late in the afternoon. The trip hadn't yielded any results in finding the will, but I felt stronger and more determined. Elizabeth was right. I needed to be prepared for any turn of events. The next day, I called Arthur Hampton and made an appointment. He agreed to see me in his office in 3 days. Then I began to scrutinize the house, trying to find places I hadn't checked yet. Maybe Howard had hidden the will somewhere I hadn't even thought of. In the evening, the phone rang. Calder announced that he and Paisley were coming tomorrow and would be staying the weekend. "We want to help you sort through your father's things," he said, as if he were doing me a huge favor. "That won't be necessary," I replied. "I'm not ready to get rid of his things yet." "Mom, it's been a month," Calder said, a note of impatience in his voice. "You can't cling to the past forever. You need to move on." I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Who was he to tell me when I should move on? He hadn't even been close to my father for the past few years, barely calling once a week, and now he's trying to tell me how to deal with my grief. "I'll decide for myself when I'm ready," I replied coldly. "But you can come if you want." After the conversation, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Something in Calder's tone made me even more wary. He was too insistent, too sure of himself, like he'd already made up his mind for me. I got up and went to Howard's office. I needed to check things out one more time before Calder and Paisley arrived. Something told me they'd be looking for the will on their own, and I had to make sure I hadn't missed any hiding places. The morning was overcast, heavy gray clouds looming over Worcester promising rain. I woke up with the clear intention of making another trip to our lake house. Even though Elizabeth and I had already checked it out, something told me I'd missed a detail. Howard was a prudent man who liked surprises. Perhaps he had hidden the will in such a way that it could only be found by knowing a special clue. I made breakfast by machine, thinking of the trip ahead. Calder and Paisley weren't due until the evening, so I had plenty of time to drive to the lake and back. While I was washing dishes, the phone rang. It was Elizabeth. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked with concern in her voice. "I'm going back to the cabin," I answered. "Something's been bugging me. I think I'm missing something." "Would you like me to come with you?" "Thanks, but I'd rather be alone tonight. I need to think. I need to remember." Howard loved riddles, you know. He might have left some clue that only I could figure out. "I understand." Elizabeth sounded sympathetic. "Call me if you need anything." After the conversation, I quickly packed up and got behind the wheel. The drive to the lake was familiar, but it seemed longer today. It started raining as I pulled out of Worcester, light at first, then harder and harder. The windshield wipers could barely keep up, and I had to slow down. Memories of Howard, of our life together, swirled in my head. I remembered the day we'd bought the house. Howard had seen the ad in the paper, and he'd gotten the idea. "Imagine, Violet," he said, "our own place by the water, where we can fish, read books, and just watch the sunset." I hesitated. We weren't rich, and buying a second home seemed like an unacceptable luxury, but Howard insisted, and I agreed. Now I was grateful to him for that decision. The cottage became our refuge from everyday life, a place where we were always happy. When I pulled up in front of the cottage, the rain had stopped a little. As I got out of the car, I breathed deeply of the humid air, filled with the scents of pine trees and the lake. Howard loved that smell, saying it cleansed the soul. Inside, the cabin looked the same as it had 2 days ago when Elizabeth and I had left it. I walked slowly through the rooms, trying to look at them through Howard's eyes. Where would he hide something important? What was special to him about this place? I stopped at the fireplace in the living room. There was a picture hanging above it. Howard and I on the dock, smiling, fishing rods in hand. It was our first summer here. I took the photo off the wall and scrutinized the frame. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I looked behind the fireplace empty. For the next 2 hours, I methodically searched every corner of the cabin. I checked the floorboards to see if they creaked, if they were loose from the floor. I tapped the walls looking for cavities, examined every book on the shelf, every pot in the kitchen. Even went outside and checked the shed where Howard kept his fishing tackle and tools. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Tired and frustrated, I sat on the porch looking out over the lake. The rain had almost stopped and the water was rippling. In the distance, I could see the wharf where Howard liked to fish. The wharf! I jumped up and walked quickly down to the water. The wharf was old, some of the planks rotted and creaking under my feet. Howard had intended to repair it last summer, but hadn't had time because of his illness. At the end of the dock was a small wooden box where we kept spare tackle and fish lures. I opened the box, full of hope, but inside were only old fishing hooks, line and floats. I went through the contents. Nothing like a will. The sun was already beginning to sink. It was time to head back to Worcester. Calder and Paisley must have arrived by now, and they must be surprised at my absence. I took one last lap around the cabin, checking to see if I'd forgotten anything, and got into the car with a heavy heart. The drive back was spent in thought. Where could Howard have hidden the will? Maybe it didn't even exist. Maybe I was just clinging to a phantom hope. It was almost 8 p.m. when I pulled up in front of the house. Calder's black BMW was parked in the driveway. They had indeed already arrived. I turned off the engine, but I didn't get out of the car right away. I needed to gather my thoughts to get ready to meet my son and daughter-in-law. Finally, taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked quietly toward the house. Strangely, the light in the living room was off, even though it was starting to get dark. I decided to enter through the back door, which led directly into the kitchen. The door was unlocked. I opened it cautiously and stepped in. There were voices coming from the living room. Calder and Paisley were talking about something, unaware of my presence. I froze, not wanting to interrupt their conversation. Suddenly, I heard my name. Violet is becoming a problem, Paisley said. She's stubbornly searching for the damn will. What if she finds it? She won't. Calder's voice sounded confident. Dad didn't have time to draw it up. Hampton said he just picked up the draft. But what if he did? What if it's in here somewhere and she finds it? Even if she does, we can always challenge it, Calder said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather, not his own mother's fate. Dad was sick, on heavy painkillers. We can prove he was incapacitated at the time he signed. I froze, unable to believe my ears. My own son was talking about how to cheat the system, how to take away the inheritance Howard had left me. And if it doesn't work? Paisley insisted. Then we'll go the other way. Violet's 78, and she lives alone. All it takes is a couple of incidents, and we can initiate the process of declaring her incompetent. I already talked to Dr. Prescott, and he's willing to help. I felt my legs starting to shake. Dr. Prescott had been our family doctor for 20 years. I trusted him, and he agreed to help my son declare me incompetent? And you think the court will agree? I could hear the doubt in Paisley's voice. Of course. Senile dementia, forgetfulness, inability to care for himself. Classic picture. Add a couple of accidental falls, maybe one small kitchen fire, and it's a done deal. No one is going to let an elderly woman with dementia live alone in a big house. And then what? Then I, as her only son, become her legal guardian, and I get control of all her assets, including her house and bank accounts. And Violet herself? She'll go to a good nursing home. She'll get all the treatment she needs. Calder grinned. At her own expense, of course. As I listened to the conversation, I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. Was this my son, whom I had born and raised, whom I loved with all my heart despite his coldness? Is he really that cruel and heartless? And if she resists? Paisley asked. She won't, Calder replied confidently. By the time we're done, she'll be questioning her own sanity. Small doses of sleeping pills in her tea, rearranging things, strange noises at night, and in a month she'll be begging to be sent to a nursing home. Are you sure you want to go that far? Paisley didn't sound sympathetic to me, but rather worried about the consequences for them. Do you want to wait another 10 years for her to die on her own? Calder replied sharply. The house is deteriorating. It's losing value every year. If we sell it now, we can buy that penthouse in Boston you're dreaming of. Plus, there'll be enough left over for your gallery. You're right, Paisley softened. It's all a little scary. What if someone finds out? No one will find out, Calder said with such confidence that I was scared. Everything would look perfectly legal. A worried son taking care of his aging mother who would doubt that? I couldn't listen any longer. Quietly, trying not to make any noise, I slipped out the back door and walked back to the car. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to put the key in the ignition. I needed to get out of here, and as soon as possible. I pulled into the street, trying not to turn on the headlights until I was far enough away from the house. Go where? Elizabeth's? No, that would be the first place Calder would look for me. I needed somewhere he wouldn't look right away. The train station. I could take the train to New York. I had a cousin there, Muriel, who we hadn't spoken to in years. Calder didn't even know her address. I could stop at her place, gather my thoughts, decide what to do next. I pointed the car toward the Worcester train station. On the way, I stopped at an ATM and withdrew the maximum amount the daily limit allowed, $500. That should be enough for the ticket and the first time in New York. The station was almost empty. Not many people were traveling at this time of night. I looked at the schedule. The last train to New York was leaving in 30 minutes. Perfect. I approached the ticket counter and had already opened my mouth to ask for a ticket when I suddenly stopped. What am I doing? Running away from my own home like a thief? Leaving everything Howard and I had spent a lifetime building at the mercy of these vultures? Number Howard wouldn't want that. He always told me to be strong, to stand up for myself. Never let anyone intimidate you, Violet, he used to say. Even if it's our own son. I stepped away from the register and sat on a bench, trying to gather my thoughts. Running away wouldn't solve anything. Sooner or later, Calder would find me, and then he'd have even more arguments for my incapacity. Look, she ran away from home wandering the streets. She's a danger to herself. No, I couldn't let that happen. I had to fight. Fight for my home, for Howard's legacy, for my independence and my dignity. But how? Calder was smart, calculating, and obviously ruthless. He had money, connections, youth. What did I have? I pulled out of my purse the picture of Howard that I always carried with me. He was looking at me with his clear eyes, and I thought he was trying to say something. Violet, remember the will. Everything will be all right. His last words echoed in my head again. He knew Calder would try to take everything away, and he'd prepared for it. The will existed, I was sure of it, and I had to find it, but not just that. I needed proof of what Calder was plotting against me, proof of his collusion with Dr. Prescott, proof that would protect me if he did try to declare me incompetent. A plan began to form in my head. I wasn't a lawyer or a detective, but I had lived a long life and knew that the truth had a way of coming to the surface if properly aided. I stood up and walked determinedly toward the exit of the train station. Calder and Paisley had probably already noticed my absence and were wondering where I was. Maybe even worried, not because they were worried about me, but because they needed me for their plan. I'll get behind the wheel and drive back home. I'll act like nothing happened. I'll say I went to the lake, lost track of time. They can't suspect I know what they're up to. It'll give me an advantage. And tomorrow I'll act. I will find the will, gather evidence, seek help from those I can trust. I won't let them take away the life Howard and I built together. With those thoughts in mind, I stepped outside, where I was greeted by the cool evening air. The rain had stopped, and the first stars appeared in the sky. I took a deep breath and headed to my car. There was a fight ahead of me, and I was ready for it. After all, I had been Howard Aldridge's wife for almost 60 years. I had survived wars, economic crises, the birth of a child, the death of my parents, and now the death of my beloved husband. Calder had grossly underestimated me if he thought I'd give up without a fight. I got behind the wheel, started the engine, and headed determinedly back to the house I was going to defend with all my might. The morning after I got home was tense. When I returned last night, Calder and Paisley greeted me with feigned concern. "Mom, where have you been? We were worried." Calder hugged me, but I could feel the falseness in his every move. "I went to the lake," I said calmly. "I wanted to be alone to think." "You could have called," Paisley said with a strained smile. "We were about to call the police." "I'm sorry, I lost track of time." I tried to speak naturally, though inside I was seething with anger and resentment. Now, sitting at the breakfast table and watching them exchange meaningful glances, I knew I had to act fast. My son and his wife were plotting to deprive me of everything, and I couldn't let them do it. "I have a meeting with Arthur Hampton today," I said, buttering my toast. "I'd like to clarify some legal matters." "Why?" Calder instantly tensed. "I can find out for you. You don't want to bother Arthur with trivial matters." "It's not nothing." I looked him straight in the eye. Howard trusted Arthur, and so did I. He'd be better at explaining the inheritance to me. "As you wish." Calder shrugged, trying to look nonchalant, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, a sure sign that he was annoyed. "Do you want me to drive you?" "No, thanks. I'll take the bus." I didn't want him to hear my conversation with the lawyer. I'll stop at the store and get some groceries. After breakfast, I got ready and left the house, feeling the stares of my son and daughter-in-law. They were probably discussing me as soon as the door closed behind me. But I didn't care. I had a plan. Arthur Hampton's office was in downtown Worcester, in an old brick building with a sign that read, Hampton and Associates Legal Services. I'd known Arthur for almost 30 years. He was not only Howard's attorney, but also our friend. Violet, good to see you. Arthur greeted me in his office, a cozy room with bookcases to the ceiling and an antique desk. How are you holding up? Honestly, not so good. I sat down in the leather chair across from him. Arthur, I need your help, and it's confidential. Arthur frowned and nodded. Of course. What happened? I told him everything. About Calder and Paisley's strange behavior, about the conversation I'd overheard, about their plans to declare me incompetent and take my inheritance. I spoke quietly, though I knew no one could overhear us. The walls of Arthur's office were soundproofed. As I spoke, the lawyer's face grew darker and darker. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. These are serious charges, Violet, he said at last, and, unfortunately, not uncommon in my practice. Children who want to get their parents' inheritance as soon as possible sometimes do unseemly things. Do you believe me? I asked, relieved that I didn't have to convince anyone. Of course I do, Arthur smiled slightly. I've known you and Howard too long to doubt it. Besides, he grew serious, Howard saw something like this coming. What do you mean? When he came to me to draw up the new will, he said he was worried about you. Not about his condition, it was hopeless then, but about what would happen to you after he died. He knew that Calder, Arthur hesitated, searching for words. That Calder didn't always put family values first. Howard made a new will? I stepped forward. Are you sure? Yes. I prepared the document according to his instructions. He took the draft, said he'd make the final changes and come back in a few days to finalize it. Arthur sighed. But he never came back. His condition deteriorated faster than we expected. So there is no legally valid new will? My heart dropped. Not necessarily, Arthur held up a finger. If Howard signed the document in the presence of two witnesses, the will can be recognized as valid, even if it wasn't formally probated by me. It's called a holographic will, handwritten or typed, but signed by the testator and witnesses. But I don't know if he signed it or if there were witnesses. Howard was a pedantic man, Arthur smiled. I'm more than sure he did everything right. The question is, where is this document? I shook my head. I've looked everywhere. In the house, in the lakehouse, in the safety deposit box. I can't find it anywhere. Howard loved riddles, Arthur said thoughtfully. He could have hidden the will so that only you could find it. Was there a special secret between you, a place or thing that only mattered to the two of you, I wondered? Howard and I had lived a long life, full of shared secrets and memorable moments. But what could any of it have to do with the will? I don't know, I finally admitted, but I'll think about it. Good. Arthur nodded. In the meantime, let's discuss what we can do to protect you from Calder's machinations. We spent the next hour strategizing. Arthur explained that the process of declaring a person incompetent is not as simple as Calder imagines. It requires medical reports, testimony, court hearings. It's a long process with a lot of testing. But there's a problem, Arthur frowned. If Calder really is in cahoots with Dr. Prescott, that complicates things. A medical report from your attending physician would carry a lot of weight. What am I supposed to do? I could feel the panic starting to set in. I have an idea. Arthur leaned toward me. What if you played on their field? What do you mean? Pretend you're really starting to suffer from mild dementia. Nothing dramatic. Just forget some things, mix up names, look confused. Let them think their plan is working. Why? I didn't understand the logic. First, it'll give you time to find the will. Second, if they believe you're not a threat, they'll be less cautious. Maybe you can gather evidence of their collusion. You're suggesting I spy on my own son? I was shocked. I'm suggesting you defend yourself, Arthur said firmly. Calder had already crossed the line when he planned to declare you incompetent for the inheritance. You have the right to defend yourself. I stayed silent. thinking about what he said. The thought of pretending to be feeble-minded was humiliating, but if it would buy me time and help me find the will, all right, I finally decided. I'll do it, but I'll need your help. Of course, Arthur nodded. I'll be on call 24 hours a day. And here's the other thing. I suggest installing hidden cameras and tape recorders in your house. If Calder and Paisley are really up to no good, we'll need proof. I don't know, Arthur. I hesitated. This seems excessive. Violet, Arthur took my hand. I understand your hesitation. But if Calder is really in cahoots with the doctor, if he's really planning to slip you sleeping pills and stage accidents, we're talking about serious crimes. You have to protect yourself. I sighed. He was right, as much as I'd like to think otherwise. Okay, but the installation has to be discreet. I don't want them to suspect anything. I know reliable people, Arthur assured me. They'll do it professionally. In the meantime, he pulled a small tape recorder out of his desk drawer. Take this. It looks like an ordinary keychain, but it actually records sound. Carry it with you when Calder and Paisley are around. I took the recorder, feeling like the heroine of a spy movie. I never thought I'd be doing this kind of thing at 78. Thank you, Arthur. I stood up, ready to leave. You're a true friend. It's an honor to help you, Violet. Arthur stood up too. Howard was my friend, and I won't let anything bad happen to you. I left the office with a heavy heart, but with renewed determination. The plan was risky, but I saw no other way out. I needed to find the will and protect myself from my own son's machinations at the same time, and I was prepared to do whatever was necessary. On the way home, I stopped by the supermarket to make my story about grocery shopping seem plausible. Choosing fruits and vegetables, I mentally prepared myself for my new role. How should an elderly woman with incipient dementia behave? What should I forget and what should I remember? Where is the line between convincing pretense and overplaying it? When I got home, I found Calder working on his laptop in the living room. Paisley, from the sounds of it, was in the kitchen. Here I am, I said, setting the grocery bags on the floor. Bought everything I needed. How was your meeting with the Hamptons? Calder asked, keeping his eyes on the screen. With who? I decided to start my introduction immediately. Calder looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. The lawyer, Mom. You said you were going to see Arthur Hampton. Oh, yes, of course. I pretended I'd just remembered. The meeting was, informative. Arthur explained a lot about inheritance. What did he say? Calder closed the laptop, looking at me carefully. Well, different legal terms. I didn't understand everything. I deliberately looked confused. Something about a will, about shares of inheritance. He was talking so fast I couldn't take notes. Did you write anything down? Calder frowned. No, it's an expression. I smiled uncertainly. I think I'm tired. I'm going to get some rest. Sure, Mom. Calder looked at me with ill-concealed interest. Get some rest. Paisley will make dinner. I went up to my room and closed the door. My heart was pounding like crazy. I think my little performance had worked. Calder looked interested and a little surprised. Now I had to keep it up, but carefully, without overdoing it. That evening at dinner, I continued my game. I forgot what day of the week it was, mixed up the name of the mailman I talked to in the morning, and repeatedly asked what I'd just been told. Calder and Paisley exchanged meaningful glances, thinking I didn't notice. Mom, are you feeling okay? Calder asked with feigned concern. Yeah, just a little tired, I smiled. I haven't been sleeping well lately. Maybe you should see Dr. Prescott. Paisley suggested it. Check your blood pressure, run some tests. Maybe. I pretended to consider the suggestion. But not right now. Maybe next week. I can get you an appointment, Calder insisted. It wouldn't do any good to put my health on hold. Okay, I conceded, knowing a visit to Dr. Prescott was inevitable. Sign me up. After dinner, I said I wanted to go to bed early. In fact, I needed to think about where Howard might have hidden the will. Going up to my room, I sat on my bed and closed my eyes, trying to concentrate. Was there a special secret between you two, a place or thing that only mattered to the two of you? Arthur's words rolled around in my head. Howard and I had many such secrets and special places. Our first kiss on the Charles River Bridge in Boston. the park bench where he proposed to me, the restaurant where we celebrated every wedding anniversary. But all of that was in the past, and I couldn't imagine how those memories could be connected to the will. Suddenly, it hit me. Music. Howard loved music, especially jazz and classical. We had a large collection of vinyl records, many of which had special meaning to us. Could the will be hidden among them? I wanted to test that hunch immediately, but realized that now was not the time. Calder and Paisley might notice my search. No, it would be better to wait for the right moment when they would be away or busy. The next morning, I continued my performance. I salted my coffee instead of tea at breakfast, forgot I'd already taken my medication, and almost drank a double dose. Calder immediately took the pills away from me. "Mom, you already took them," he said, pretending to be concerned. "Look, there's an empty cell in your pill box." "Really?" I acted surprised. "I don't remember." "This isn't the first time you've forgotten something." Calder exchanged a glance with Paisley. "Maybe we should see a specialist, just to check it out." "What kind of specialist?" I pretended I didn't understand. "A neurologist or a gerontologist," Calder explained. "They specialize in the elderly. It's no big deal, just a routine checkup." "I don't think it's necessary." I shook my head. "I've just been a little distracted lately. It'll pass." "Sure, Mom," Calder smiled, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. "Whatever you say." After breakfast, they announced they were going into town to do some shopping. This was my chance. As soon as their car was around the corner, I rushed into the living room where our records were stored. A large wooden cabinet, specially made for the purpose, contained hundreds of vinyl discs, neatly arranged alphabetically. I started with Howard's most favorite albums: Frank Sinatra, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald. I took each record out, checked the envelope, sometimes even the vinyl itself, to see if there was anything hidden in between. Nothing. Then I moved on to the classics. Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, same result. I was beginning to despair when my gaze fell on the lowest shelf, where there were albums I rarely listened to. Among them was one that Howard had bought shortly before his illness, a collection of old romantic ballads from the 50s. He gave it to me on our last wedding anniversary, saying, "Violet, these songs are like the story of our love. Listen to them when I'm gone and remember that I will always love you." With a beating heart, I pulled out the album. The envelope was worn, but in good condition. I opened it, expecting to see black vinyl, but instead, there was a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. It was a will. It was printed on official letterhead, signed by Howard, and most importantly, with the signatures of two witnesses: our neighbor Noah Brooks and his wife Elizabeth. The date on the document was just a week before Howard's death. I quickly ran my eyes over the text. According to the will, I received full title to our house in Worcester and all financial assets. Calder would get the summer house by the lake and a certain amount of money, but only after I died. Until then, I was the sole beneficiary of the entire estate. Now I understood why Calder was so insistent on selling the house and moving into a nursing home. He couldn't get his share while I was alive and in possession of the property, and a direct inheritance after my death would have been burdened with taxes and legal delays. It was much easier to declare me incapacitated, become my guardian, and dispose of everything as he saw fit. I heard the sound of a car pulling up Calder and Paisley were coming back. Quickly tucking the will into the pocket of my robe, I returned the record to its place and hurried into the kitchen. When they came in, I was innocently wiping dishes. "Back already?" I pretended to be surprised. "That was fast." "We've been away for almost 3 hours, Mom." Calder looked at me strangely. "It's almost lunchtime." "It is?" I faked embarrassment. I'd lost track of time. That's weird. "What have you been doing all this time?" Paisley asked, putting the shopping bags on the table. "Just resting," I smiled uncertainly. "I cleaned up a little. No big deal." Calder and Paisley looked at me, and I could almost physically feel their confidence growing that their plan was working. They thought I was really starting to lose my mind, becoming forgetful and distracted. My pretense was working even better than I expected. That evening, after they'd gone to bed, I quietly pulled out the tape recorder Arthur had given me and recorded a message. Today, May 15th, 2024, I, Violet Aldridge, found my late husband, Howard Aldridge's will. The document was hidden in a vinyl record envelope given to me by Howard on our last wedding anniversary. The will was signed by Howard and two witnesses, Noah and Elizabeth Brooks. I am of sound mind and solid memory, despite pretending to suffer from dementia to buy time and protect myself from the illegal actions of my son Calder and his wife Paisley. It's been a week since I found Howard's will, a week filled with pretense and careful evidence gathering. My notion of incipient dementia worked flawlessly. Calder and Paisley fully believed in my illness, and each day became less and less cautious in their conversations. Arthur had installed several hidden cameras and microphones in the house, in the living room, kitchen, and dining room. The technicians came when Calder and Paisley left for Boston for the day and did the job professionally, leaving no trace. Now I had not only the will, but proof of their conspiracy. It was time to act. The morning began as usual, with breakfast in the company of my son and daughter-in-law. I continued my game, forgetting simple things and getting confused about dates. Mom, do you remember that you have an appointment with Dr. Prescott today? Calder asked, buttering his toast. Dr. Prescott? I faked confusion. Why? I feel fine. We talked about this yesterday, Calder explained patiently. Just a routine checkup, nothing serious. Oh, yes, of course, I smiled. I'd forgotten. Paisley gave Calder a meaningful look, which I noticed, but pretended not to. I'll drive you, Calder said. The reception is at 10. No need, I shook my head. I can walk myself. The clinic is only 3 blocks away. No, Mom, Calder was insistent. I insist. You've been forgetting your way to even the nearest store a lot lately. That was an exaggeration. I never forgot my way. But I pretended to be embarrassed and agreed. In fact, it was to my advantage that Calder would accompany me. It gave me a chance to carry out my plan. Okay, thanks, I smiled gratefully. After breakfast, I went up to my room, ostensibly to change before my doctor's appointment. In reality, I needed to call Arthur and let him know that everything would start today. Arthur? It's Violet, I whispered into the phone, making sure the door was shut tight. Good morning, Violet. How's it going? Calder's taking me to see Dr. Prescott today. I think it's a good time to make a move. Are you sure? Arthur's voice sounded concerned. We have recordings of their conversations, but maybe we should wait, gather more evidence. No, I don't want to wait any longer, I said firmly. I'm tired of this masquerade. It's time to put an end to it. All right, Arthur sighed. What do you want me to do? Be in your office at noon. I'll come with Calder and Paisley. I'll tell them I've found the will and I want you to explain its contents to them. What if they refuse to go? They won't, I smiled into the phone. Calder is too greedy to miss a conversation about the inheritance. All right, Arthur sounded determined. I'll be ready, and I'll get a notary to notarize the will and our meeting. Thank you, Arthur. See you soon. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Tonight is the end of everything. I'd either regain control of my life but I didn't want to think about failure. Howard always said a positive attitude was half the battle. I changed into a simple but elegant dress in the dark blue color that Howard had always loved. I put my hair in a neat bun, even put on a little makeup the first time I'd worn it since his funeral. Today I wasn't going to look like a frail old woman. Today I was Violet Aldridge, Howard Aldridge's wife, a strong and determined woman. Calder noticed the change when I came downstairs. You're dressed up today, he remarked with slight surprise. Yeah? I pretended I didn't know what he meant. I just wore the first thing I could think of. That dress was hanging in the far corner of the closet. Paisley squinted at me. I saw it when I helped you clean last week. You did? I shrugged. I don't remember. Maybe it caught my eye today. They exchanged glances again, and I could almost hear them thinking, she's completely lost her memory. The trip to Dr. Prescott's office passed in tense silence. I stared out the window. Calder drove with concentration. The clinic was housed in a small Victorian building converted into a medical center. Dr. Prescott met us in his office, a tall, lean man with graying temples and a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. I had once trusted him, considered him a family friend. Now I saw him as an accomplice in a conspiracy against me. Mrs. Aldridge, it's good to see you. He pointed to the chair across from his desk. How are you feeling? I'm fine. I sat down with my hands in my lap. A little forgetful lately, but generally good. More than a little, Calder interjected. Mom, you forget to take your medicine, you get the days of the week mixed up, sometimes you can't remember what you did an hour ago. Really? I pretended to be surprised. I hadn't noticed. That's a symptom too, Dr. Prescott said gently. Patients often don't realize they have memory problems. He started asking me the standard questions: what day it was, who the president was, what 2 times 2 was. I answered almost all of them correctly, but I deliberately made a couple of mistakes to maintain the illusion. Let's run some tests, Dr. Prescott suggested after the basic questioning. Nothing complicated, just to assess your cognitive state. The tests were rudimentary. Draw a clock, repeat a list of words, count backwards. Again, I intentionally made a few mistakes, but not too many that I didn't overperform. After the tests, Doctor Prescott asked me to wait in the waiting room while he talked to Calder. I obediently went out, but didn't move far from the door, trying to hear their conversation. Unfortunately, they were talking too quietly. 10 minutes later, Calder came out with a serious expression on his face. Let's go home, Mom, he said, helping me up. Dr. Prescott prescribed some new medication for you. He says they'll help with your memory. Okay, honey. I let him lead me to the car. On the way home, I decided to start my plan. Calder, I said suddenly, I need to stop by Arthur Hampton's. The lawyer? He looked at me in surprise. Why? I found something important. I tried to speak clearly and coherently, dropping the pretense for the first time in days. Your father's will. Calder braked hard, almost driving into the oncoming lane. What? Where? When? Yesterday. I decided not to tell him I'd found it a week ago. Among Howard's books. He kept it in his favorite Dickens volume. It was a lie. I found it amongst the records, but I didn't want him to know the truth. Less information, less chance of him trying to make a difference. What's in it? Calder tried to speak calmly, but I could see the white of his fingers gripping the steering wheel. I don't know exactly. I pretended to be a little confused. There's a lot of legal terms. Arthur will explain it better. I called him this morning. He's expecting us at noon. Mom, maybe we should postpone this. Calder was obviously nervous. You just came from the doctor. You need to rest. No. I shook my head. This is important. I want us to deal with it today and call Paisley, have him come to Arthur's office too. Why Paisley? Calder looked worried. She's your wife, part of the family. I smiled. That goes for her too. Calder reluctantly agreed and called Paisley. The conversation was short, but I could hear the tension in his voice. Arthur's office greeted us with silence and coolness. The receptionist ushered us into a conference room where Arthur and a man I didn't know, whom he introduced as a notary, were already waiting. Good morning, Violet Calder. Arthur shook our hands. Paisley hasn't arrived yet? She's on her way, Calder replied, looking around restlessly. She'll be here soon. We sat down at the large oval table. I took the will out of my purse and handed it to Arthur. Here, I found it yesterday among Howard's books, I said. Arthur took the document and scrutinized it, though I knew he had already seen the copy I had faxed to him a week ago. Yes, it is indeed Howard Aldridge's last will and testament, he confirmed. Signed by him and 2 witnesses, Noah and Elizabeth Brooks. The date is April 7th, 2024, 2 weeks before his death. Calder sat motionless, his face expressionless, but I could see a vein pulsing on his temple, a sure sign of intense tension. A few minutes later, Paisley arrived, out of breath and clearly worried. She sat down next to Calder, casting a suspicious glance at me. Now that everyone is here, Arthur began, I'd like to read the main points of Howard Aldridge's will. He began to read the document, enunciating each word clearly and distinctly. According to the will, the entire estate was divided between Calder and me, but with an important condition. The family home in Worcester and the main financial assets remained at my complete disposal for the rest of my life. Calder would receive the summer lakehouse and a small amount of money now, but the bulk of the inheritance only after my death. As I read, Calder and Paisley's faces grew darker and darker. I could see them exchanging quick glances, tapping their fingers nervously on the table. That's all, Arthur finished. Any questions? Yes, Calder stepped forward. How can we be sure it's a genuine will? The father was seriously ill on heavy painkillers. He may not have been fully aware of what he was signing. The will was drawn up in accordance with the rules, Arthur replied calmly. Howard was of sound mind, as witnesses Noah and Elizabeth Brooks can attest. Besides, I personally counseled him on the matter, and I can testify to his capacity at the time the document was drawn up. And yet, Calder insisted, it can be disputed. It can be, Arthur agreed, but I wouldn't advise it. We have all the evidence we need to prove Howard's capacity, including his doctor's report of the same day. Challenging it would be a long and expensive process with little chance of success. Calder fell silent, clearly considering his options. Paisley put her hand on his shoulder as if to keep him from making any hasty decisions. There's one more thing, I said, feeling it was time for my big move. Arthur, show them, please. Arthur nodded and turned on the laptop on the table. A video popped up on the screen, Calder and Paisley in our living room discussing a plan to incapacitate me. Violet is becoming a problem. She's stubbornly looking for that damn will. What if she finds it? She won't. Dad didn't have time to draw it up. Hampton said he only picked up the draft. I saw Calder and Paisley stiffen, their faces pale. The video continued, every word clear and unmistakable. Their plan to manipulate my medication, the staging of accidents, the collusion with Dr. Prescott. It was all recorded. When the video ended, the room was dead silent. It's illegal, Calder finally squeezed out. Secretly recording? In my own house? I looked at him calmly. I think the court would find it admissible under the circumstances, especially when they hear about your plan to slip me sleeping pills and fake accidents. Mom, you don't understand. Calder tried to pull himself together. Paisley and I were just worried about you. You live alone in a big house. Your health is failing. Don't bother, Calder. I shook my head. I've heard enough. Your plan to incapacitate me to gain control of the inheritance didn't work. The will was found, it's legitimate, and I'm completely sane, as the independent doctor I saw last week can attest. What? Calder looked stunned. Yes, I saw another doctor, I smiled. Dr. Benson, a gerontology specialist. I have an official report that I'm fully competent, and your collusion with Dr. Prescott, I shook my head, is a matter for the Medical Ethics Committee. Paisley stood up suddenly. Let's go, Calder. We have nothing to do here. Sit down, Arthur said sharply. We're not done yet. Paisley reluctantly lowered herself into the chair. Here's what we're going to do, Arthur continued. Violet is willing to keep these tapes private and not file a complaint for attempted fraud and endangering her health. In exchange, the two of you will sign a document acknowledging the validity of Howard's will and waiving any claim to Violet's estate during her lifetime. You also agree not to approach her without her express invitation. Violation of any of these conditions will result in the release of the records and legal consequences. Calder and Paisley sat in silence, realizing the hopelessness of their situation. You have a choice, I added gently. Sign the papers and walk away with what Howard left you. A summer house and a small amount of money. Or refuse and lose everything, including your reputation and perhaps your freedom. After a long pause, Calder nodded slowly. All right, we'll sign. The next half hour passed in paperwork. The notary notarized every signature, every page. When it was done, Calder and Paisley stood up, ready to leave. Calder, I called to him at the door. I want you to know that despite everything that has happened, you are my son. And I will always love you, even if I can't forgive what you tried to do. He looked at me with a blank stare. You won, Mom. Enjoy your victory. With those words, they walked away. I knew I would probably never see them again, and a strange feeling, a mixture of relief and sadness, swept over me. Are you all right? Arthur asked when we were alone. Yeah, I sighed. It's just not the kind of victory you want to be happy about. I understand. He squeezed my hand. What are you going to do next? Sell the house, I said firmly. Too many memories, good and bad. I need a fresh start. Where will you go? I haven't decided yet, I smiled. Maybe closer to Elizabeth. She said there was a cozy little cottage for sale in her neighborhood. Or maybe I'll leave Worcester altogether, maybe to New York, to my cousin Muriel. I haven't seen her in a long time. Sounds like a good plan, Arthur nodded. A new beginning. 2 weeks later, I stood on the doorstep of my house for the last time. The furniture had been sold or given to charities, personal belongings packed into a few boxes. The realtor had found a buyer, a young family with 2 children who had fallen in love with the house at first sight. I walked around the empty rooms saying goodbye to each one. This is where Howard and I had lived for 30 years. This is where he died. This is where I'd survived my son's betrayal. But now it was time to move on. Elizabeth was waiting for me on the veranda. Are you ready? She asked, smiling. Ready? I looked back at the house one last time. Goodbye, Howard. Thank you for everything. We got into Elizabeth's car and drove away from the house, away from the past, toward a new life. I was 78 years old, but I felt like I was just beginning to live. There was a new home, new opportunities, new adventures ahead. What are you thinking about? Elizabeth asked as we pulled onto the highway. That Howard would be pleased, I smiled. He always said that life wasn't a destination, but a journey. And my journey continues. The sun was shining brightly, the day was warm and promising. I was ready for a new chapter of my life, new challenges and joys. And somewhere deep inside, I felt that Howard approved of my choice. After all, he had always wanted only the best for me: freedom, independence, and happiness. And now, thanks to his foresight and my determination, I had it all. The car sped down the highway, taking me farther away from the past and closer to the future I had chosen for myself.